Thanks.
We are Team 10, and we're here today with Mark Fackler, who's been kind enough to join us and answer some questions that we have about leadership. So we thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I want to say a couple words about the project and really what our objective is here. We're here as part of a final deliverable for Management 406, which is an MBA course at the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego for leadership skills, values, and teamwork. We've been asked to demonstrate our understanding of course materials and apply it to something meaningful to us. The group decided after considerable deliberation that what better way to demonstrate our understanding than by having a rich and interactive dialogue with a successful business leader, applying themes and topics addressed in the interview to course materials. Again, we're fortunate enough to have Mark Fackler with us, who is as a former CEO, founder and CEO, and is very active in the San Diego business community. A couple words on Mark before we begin. And Mark, feel free to jump in if I'm off base here.
You're doing just fine.
Mark founded and was CEO of Stellcom, a hardware and software services company. He led the company to success and profitability for 16 years before turning over the reins to a new CEO. He's currently a Vistage Group Chair, where he works with local CEOs and as well as a handful of very fortunate MBA students here at the Rady School to help enrich personal and professional lives by providing a platform for peer group interaction and discussion. Mark also is currently president of TKF, an organization dedicated to stopping youth violence. And he sits on the board of directors for Safe Parks, which again is a nonprofit organization dedicated to amusement park safety. He is also chairman of the San Diego Social Venture Partners, an organization dedicated to philanthropy in San Diego. And for his free time, when he has free time, he enjoys training for Ironman distance triathlons and is currently learning Spanish. So our hope today was to sort of open up and have a forum here for discussion and interaction with Mark, particularly with themes that we think are important to our own careers, which are team performance and dynamics and change management. We're also very interested in hearing about leadership topics close to Mark and that have worked for Mark both in his personal life and his professional life. Each of us will spend hopefully around 15 minutes on a particular section and walk through a series of questions. And really the goal here is just to be open and interactive and provide any insight and advice that you could, which would be terrific. I'm going to go ahead and let the team introduce themselves before we get started.
Hi, I'm Amit Chakradev. I'm a technology team manager at Texas Instruments.
I'm Shauna Fredrickson, and I'm in the biotech industry, most recently with Stellcom Antibody Technologies, which I co-founded as a startup company about 10 years ago.
Hi, I'm Kai Tao. I'm currently a technical manager for marketing at a wireless communication technology company.
And my name is Mark Hermsmeyer. I'm VP of Business Development for Sports Spectator, a sports marketing firm based out of LA. Okay, we're going to open the floor up for some questions here. Shauna's going to kick it off with leadership and culture, and let's dive right in.
Sounds good. So to begin our discussion today, we wanted to start off with leadership and culture, as Mark just said, and to kick that off, I wanted to ask you a question that's actually not on that list, which is, how would you describe your leadership style? Very, very open question, just in general.
I guess my style is openness. I like to share as much information as I can with the group, whether it be employees or a Vistage group or a family.
Mm-hmm.
And my belief is that if you tell them what the goals are and the values and what the parameters are, and you get them excited and you answer all their questions and provide them all their information that they're asking for, that there's a chance that you might be successful in trying to achieve whatever mission or whatever purpose it is for that group would be, whether it's a nonprofit or a family or a company. Does that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Certainly. right on the mark of what I was thinking. And you actually mentioned something that I think segues nicely into the next questions, which are on your list, which is that you mentioned values, and in your bio there was discussion about the importance to you of values. And so, having said that, how important for the culture of your company were your core values when you were building from the startup, and as that progressed through, and sort of what role did that play for you?
When I started the company, I didn't have an understanding of core values. However, I'm a reasonably steady person. So by default, I had core value. I mean, everybody has core values. And I hired people who resonated with me, which would imply that I would hire people who had the same sort of values that, well, maybe not everyone does, well, in fact, everyone doesn't do that, but for me, that's how I hired people was, in a sense, did I like them and did I resonate with them?
Right.
After the company got to a certain point, maybe, I don't know, 3 million and 30 employees or so, I had joined Vistage, which was my MBA program. And the other members and the speakers started talking about this concept of core values, and I said, I should write these down. And so I wrote them down, and I wrote them down in a vacuum, as opposed to bringing all the employees together and trying to get a consensus on what the values of the organization are. The gentleman that I hired to help me do that said the company was small enough, it didn't matter. His sense was that the employees were going to believe in it anyway. And I wouldn't necessarily advise people to do it that way, but I did. And then, hundreds of employees came through the company over the following years, and because we pushed core values so much, it was a natural filter. Right. It was a natural. It was part of the interview process. And at one point, right before I left, we did a very extensive employee survey. And what came out of it was 90+% of the people believed in the core values and felt that the company adhered to them because we were so open about it, or tried to adhere.
Right, sure.
And many of them said that they actually came to the company because of the core values. Because there's a ton of engineering firms out there, but they liked the fact that on the homepage, or right when people would walk in, they were on the wall and people talked about them. So I guess, yeah, they were really important to me. And yeah.
Very interesting. And I think you actually touched on the next question on there, which says here, did the values come before the culture shaped the values, sort of, which came first? And it sounded like you were saying that in terms of an intentional setting of a culture, that you had core values, and the culture sort of happened, and then you learned more about how to establish core values. And how did that change the culture when you did it in a more organic sense versus learned sense?
No, it didn't. And the gentleman who worked with me, who helped me through this process, was right, that the employees didn't balk when I walked out of the office one day and I offered them a proposal. What do you think of these core values? And actually, at that point, we helped craft some of the language. Honesty and balance and improvement were going to be the values, and everybody liked that. And then we crafted the language, and we figured out how to implement them and how to hold each other accountable on them. And I talked about them all the time in front of clients and vendors, and my mom and my dad, my kids, and I mean, everybody I could talk to would hear our core values.
So it's a value actually you personally believe in. It's not only for the company, but for your personal life as well on the side.
I truly believe that the culture of an organization derives from the CEO. As organizations get larger, you can create subcultures, and they can be in conflict with the CEO's culture, but it's difficult. Yeah, did that answer?
Yeah, just see this these values. The other question I have is, so you think the value actually helps the company to grow, to form as a unity over the years?
And it gets back to the previous question. Because they were my values, and because I was comfortable living in them and living with them, and I was surrounding myself with people of like mind and like intention and like set of values, when we had difficult things to do, there was a bond. There was a common belief, a common understanding on how to do it. And that's why I think that it's really personal to the CEO who's in my case, it was my life for a while. And why would you not put your belief out on the table? Why would you want to walk into an organization where there was a misalignment with you? So.
Yeah.
Actually, your point resonates very well with one video that we saw in our lecture. This is an example of Southwest Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
Their CEO truly believed in having fun, and we could see in that video that every employee really believed in that culture.
Right, isn't that a fascinating story? And that was it. That was his personality. You could tell it was his personality.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is he's left now, and it seems, as from my point of view and being a client or customer of Southwest, that it still exists. And when they had that problem with kicking the lady off the plane who was a Hooters girl,
Right.
what was fascinating to me was there was a funny commercial on the radio making fun of Southwest Airlines. I mean, they were laughing at themselves. They were saying, "We blew it." And I thought to myself, how interesting that the culture has been preserved from one CEO to the next CEO.
Yeah.
That's a neat example.
So another question along the lines of leadership. You'd mentioned that you sought to hire individuals with common values as your own. How essential, assuming that weren't the case, how essential is buy-in and getting buy-in and sort of instilling a sense of ownership within each of the employees as these are a set of their own values?
I think it's absolutely critical, but I don't believe that you can change. You have all these applicants who come in for a specific position. I don't believe that you can say, this person is incredibly talented, but their values are slightly misaligned. Let's hire them. That, to me, is a terrible mistake. Mm-hmm. What's way more important is, here's a person whose values are aligned, and they might not be as intelligent as this other person, but this is cancer in the organization. This is a possibility of success, because you would assume that the person has at least enough talent to get the job done, and then it's easy, in my opinion, to teach the things that are necessary to execute the job. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting everyone rowing together and wanting to row together. So it's not that we change their values, it's that it's the screen right in the very beginning. And it's the employees that need to go generally are going to be the ones where you've made a mistake on the values, or the organization has shifted such that they can't handle the current culture and environment. not their technical ability.
We have a couple of questions that are a little bit of a departure from this subject on culture, but more about kind of cultural awareness and how that's important in our business environment now as we get more global. Unless you guys have another question related to what we were just talking about, maybe we can spend the last couple of minutes we
Sure.
have on this section and
Sure.
shift gears a little bit. So the question that was here, and it's on your list as well, is how important, in your view, is it for a company to have an awareness of cultural differences and be open to cultural influences? So in other words, when you have a multicultural environment, you know, how does that work, and how important is being open to that?
This is, the world is flat. Yeah, it's incredibly important. And I'm not an expert on cultures by any means, but honesty transcends culture.
That's a good point.
Improvement transcends culture. If it turns out, strangely enough, and I can't think of an example, that if your organization has a value that a specific culture doesn't adhere to, and you know, I could stretch here or make something up. Some cultures don't pay attention to time. You know, arriving on time isn't necessarily important. Well, if that's important to your organization, then it would make sense, in my opinion, for you to not hire people who don't understand the concept of time or don't respect the concept of time. And that's a problem. It's not the company's responsibility to hire people cross-culturally. It's a company's responsibility to hire people fairly, at least in my opinion, and in the current laws of the United States, we get to do that still.
Very good. So Mark mentioned that you're learning Spanish. Are you still doing that?
I am, very slowly.
So the question somebody provided related to that was, you know, do you see that may change how you relate to Spanish cultures in terms of business settings or in your personal life? By just knowing the language, does that affect how you relate to their culture?
One of the reasons that I'm learning Spanish, one, in Southern California,
Sure.
it just makes a ton of sense, is, and there's so many Hispanics that are in the United States here, and they're working very, very hard to assimilate into our culture, to become American citizens and learn our customs and retain their certain ones. I just feel compelled to do the same. So I want to learn their customs and spend time in Mexico and not bring my culture and awareness down there, but to live in their culture and their awareness. And I've lived down there just twice for a couple of weeks in class and lived with a family, and it's fascinating for me to watch them. And they do have a difference in concept of time, and they eat different, and they take siestas, and it's great.
It's a beautiful thing.
Right, it's a right, and so yes, I think it's now we're almost talking, you know, America and values, and but the world is getting much, much flatter, and organizations need to be aware of that, and when they're dealing with other nations and other cultures, they need to have people on staff who can do that translation, not just the verbal translation, but this is how you do business. And in the first meeting, for example, you don't talk business, you talk about family. Something, passionately believe in something, and surround yourself with people who share that passion.
Sounds wonderful.
Did I mention passion?
That sounds great. Thank you very much. I think we better move on to the next subject unless anybody else wants to.
Right,
to add to that.
and thanks, Shauna, for taking the lead on that. Kai's going to speak right now about motivation and ask some questions pertaining to motivation.
Well, I think it's continuous dialogue. Actually, I like the word passion. I think being a leader, you have to have passion for what you're doing. But also the other aspect of a great leader is inspiring people around you across target as a common goal. So that's the question, how can you inspire people around you and make them share the passion that you have? That's a question.
That is a, you know,
It's a big question.
I think it's more difficult than the values part. It's interesting. As my company changed, and you know, when you're a 20-person company, there's a certain feel to it. And then when you become a 100-person or a 200 or a 300-person company, it does change. And your goals change. And I finally realized, and I'll never forget, I was in front of all the employees, and someone was complaining about a change in the organization. And I took a deep breath and I said this. I am going to lose employees who don't like change because they're comfortable where they are. If I choose to stay where I am going to lose employees who are not comfortable with the status quo and want to change. So my choice is to change, to create new goals, to move the passion or move what, you know, the goals change over time and the duties change, and everybody needs to reevaluate whether in that moment they're passionate about their job and they're passionate about what you're trying to do with the company. And it's not fair, I don't like the word fair, it's ineffective to be paralyzed by people who are no longer passionate about the mission and the company and the sense of the organization. And I guess as I hear those words, I'm almost saying you can't fix that. When you lose somebody, when you lose someone spiritually, they're gone. They no longer respect the organization and who you are and what you stand for. And once you're there, the best thing to do is to free that employee to go to another organization where they can say who I am today, and this is the corporation I'm going into, and there is a great fit. And this corporate is going to pay me some money, and I'm going to give them some value, and it's going to be a great situation.
So you believe the passion has to be authentic from each person. You cannot fake the passion.
No. And it is a difficult conversation to have for someone who has loved a job and a company and a situation to get to the point where they're miserable. And it is a difficult conversation to have, to say, you do not belong here anymore. If you do it properly and honestly and openly, the person leaves excited. I spent my time here. These new people coming in are way more passionate and way more excited and motivated and talented in getting the job done. I'm going to go someplace else. And you hug them and you give them, you know, the best. And even if at that point they weren't executing well on their job, when the references come in, and forget all the HR and legal things, the comment is these people were great when it was aligned. So when you hire that person, make sure you're aligned with their values and passion and missions, and when they get up in the morning, they can't wait to get to work. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but also from the talk you just gave, seems to me that for a startup, because it's a relatively small group of people, it's easier to have everyone passionate about the common goal of the company. But as the organization grows, and then more and more people join in, and I guess the people typically just work more in a more subdivided environment. So they kind of, it's a little bit hard to motivate them, for them in a big organization. that they may not necessarily feel your work is directly connected to the mission of the company. Do you find that's the case?
I think you've just described reality, but in a perfect world, and let's make it larger, you have 10,000 or you have 100,000 employees, and there are 6 corporate goals. And then there's a set of vice presidents now who create a set of goals, and all of their goals somehow point towards these 6 corporate goals, and then you go down layer by layer by layer. If you do a good job, the person who is sweeping the floor can say, I am affecting this corporate goal. And that's not impossible. Let me put that in the positive. That's very possible to do, and very difficult to implement because of the size and because there'll be people in there who are not aligned with your, by definition, you've got a whole bunch of people in there who aren't aligned now. And so you've got these broken channels that are going down to the person who's sweeping the floor. And if you've got a broken channel, there's a good chance that they've got the wrong message and they don't understand that they're sweeping the floor and keeping it clean is allowing Toyota to do a better job of building a hybrid to sell into the southern part of the United States, because a clean floor is important for that, and it's hard to do.
But it's possible by opening the communication channel and remind people how their work is directly contributing to the company's final goal.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it theoretically, it's possible to do. I've even heard, and I love this, is everybody, no matter where you are in the organization, is assigned to certain lines in the budget, in the income statement, right? I mean, that would make sense. And your job is either to increase the revenue on this line, or to decrease the expense on this line, or to make sure that the investment of this capital equipment investment produces more product, so it's a better return on the investment. There's no reason why you can't attach everybody to the statement. In the 100,000 person organization, it breaks, and what's required from that is an acknowledgement that it's going to break. And people are going to complain and say, you're right, it's broken. Let's figure out where it is broken and why you no longer are connected here. It might not be your issue. It could be 2 or 3 layers up in the organization where it broke.
Okay.
It's always going to be broke.
Yeah. It's company growth.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's always broke. Right.
But it's the leadership's responsibility to constantly fix it.
Correct.
I have a question real quick on motivation. And so, if I understand correctly, you were a remarkably young CEO when you started Stellcom, right?
Right.
So, what challenge, and I guess this is a multi-part question, but what challenges did you have motivating people twice your age? And how has your definition of motivation changed over the years as you grow more wise, I guess?
I don't believe that that anyone is capable of motivating somebody. Now we're going to get into semantics here. I believe that people have a built-in motivation. I believe that a manager can validate, not motivate, but they can validate. And I know for a fact that human beings love to be validated. So if someone is doing something right, that they have placed the pen properly on the desk, it's really appropriate to say, you have done a wonderful job putting the pen on the desk. Would you do that more often for me? And when it's like this, it's reasonable to say, the pen is crooked today, could you please fix it? A manager's responsibility, in my opinion, is to do the positive one 3 times for every 1 time they want to do a negative. And so if they have a problem employee, their job, in my opinion, is to work really hard to find 3 things that they can say that you've done a good job of before they have the right necessarily to tell them that they've done something bad. And if they're continually telling someone they're not validating, and the motivation, whatever is in that person, is it's their choice as to what their motivation is. So I don't know if it's interesting. I don't think it's wise. I think it's scientific. It's a system that you need to put in place. And I made sure everybody in my organization understood that your job was to do 3 to 1. And if you couldn't find something that they did wrong, you were an ineffective manager. Because everybody can do something better. And otherwise, if you never give someone a negative validation, or whatever you would call that, they're going to start thinking you're a liar.
And again, going back to what you talked about before in hiring, recognizing that intrinsic motivation, or that motivation, whether it is intrinsic or extrinsic, is something that's key with the leader, that you have to do, from the ground up, making sure that the people that you're bringing on board have that.
Right. And you see that. If you're looking for it in an interview, you see people's motivation. And if you just listen to what they say about their life and their previous jobs and how they talk about it, you have a motivated or a person who's not motivated. Just looking in their eyes, or seeing how they sit at the table, or how they walk in, or how they shake your hand, you see the motivation, and then you think, oh, well, I can work with this person if I can get them to align with the values and the goals, and they're willing to take positive and negative feedback about how they place the pen on the table.
Very interesting.
So you actually mentioned this people's need for validation. That's kind of feedback, positive feedback to the employee. Actually, typically we think of this kind of motivation, we think of something more directly like a monetary reward or promotion, but there are other things like what you mentioned, the validation, or maybe the nature of work you assign to the person.
Right.
So over time, all these different motivation types, which one do you think works for your company? Which one you think is more effective and have a long-lasting?
I think they're all the ones that you mentioned are effective.
Okay.
Money. The problem with money is you can't give someone a raise very often.
Right.
It's economically unfeasible, and so you can't rely on that as what you're going to use to motivate someone. And then they get used to the amount of money they're earning.
Exactly.
And you can't do it with position. But what I found is, and one of the most interesting things that happened is I used to write a Post-it occasionally and put it on a person's paycheck. I would sign the people's paychecks, and I would write a Post-it. I heard you did a great job with that client. And it would be a very specific 5 words, Mark. And people would save those sheets of paper for years. They would be in a sacred spot of their terminal because it's positive feedback. When I realized that was going on, I went out and bought ribbons that said, they were just a ribbon, they cost a dime. And I bought hundreds of them, and they said, nice job, way to go, or thanks. And they were 3 different colored ribbons, and people were trying to collect them all. And I would just randomly put them, actually not randomly, this is sort of weird, I've never told anyone this. I had a spreadsheet. And every day or every week I'd open up the spreadsheet, and I'd think about I'd look through who hasn't received one for a while, and I'd think, and again, this is management, I'd think really hard, what has this person done to deserve a ribbon? And you'd walk down and you hand it to them, oh, they just loved it. All you have to do is say, hey, nice job, I appreciate it, and mean it. that keeps people going every single day. The raise and the promotion and, you know, the work is interesting and all that. That's good. But it's not the most valuable form of motivation.
So the sincere appreciation and encouragement from the management goes a long way
Right.
towards motivating people.
Right. And then, right, yeah. And then bouquet of flowers when their parents pass away. Yeah, or a birthday card, not with money, with, they remembered my birthday, wow, that's great. Or a balloon. It's so easy to do. And it's such a lost, it's not art, it's not wisdom, it's just science. You know, it's just science, it's just human motivation.
Right.
And people forget about it.
Just a bit of psychology.
Right, exactly. It's normal psychology. I learned it in, you know, my sophomore year in college, and then I was at a Vistage presentation that turned out to be 100 crazy things you can do for your employees. Oh my gosh, that was a gold mine, I bet.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Kai. We appreciate those questions. We're going to shift gears now, and Amit's going to ask several questions on.
How embarrassing.
We all have cell phones.
Switch mine off. So my question to you is, how big was your core team at Stellcom, and what factors did you consider when forming your team, your core team? I know you already mentioned about resonating with the team members, but
Right.
what else? I'm trying to dig more characteristic for effective team.
I actually struggled at hiring senior managers and having them report to me and do their job. I had some brilliant, I had some fabulous ones. I had a few really bad hires. And I blew it based on values. I didn't do a good enough job. I had, you know, I guess when the company got larger, I had a chief financial, head of finance, and head of engineering, a head of operations, head of sales. Managing them was, how do I get I wanted all the information I needed to run the company on a single sheet of paper. That was the goal. And you can do that. Their job was to provide that little box of information that said how I'm doing in my job, and then there's dozens of questions that you can drill down in it, and then they would have multiple sheets of paper or reports or whatever to answer all the questions as to why the arrow went up or down, or why the dot was red instead of green or yellow, or whatever the measurement was. But it always was off of the 6 corporate goals. And they owned one goal along with a couple of other people. They had 80% of this one and this person had 10, and however we shared it. And that's what we talked about. And the management team had to be big enough or small enough such that I could have everybody in the room who could take responsibility for the goals of the organization. Does that answer it?
So do you consider shared values as the single most important thing for building a team? Is that what you're...
Absolutely, positively,
Okay.
without a doubt.
Okay. So that's the most important
It is,
that can
right, and
that
I
can fix other things.
And I failed. And you know, it's very interesting, as you get higher in management, you need to hire people who have the ability to think farther in the future A person sweeping the floor doesn't really need to think more than a day. The floor is either, a person who's managing that needs to say, well, I'm short one person, I need to go out and hire. It takes a week to hire someone, so they have to have a longer horizon. As you get farther and farther into the, or higher and higher in the organization, their ability to think into the future and plan into the future gets more critical. I also made hiring errors where people could only go, for example, they could only think a year in advance, and I needed them to be thinking 3 to 5 years. And I didn't, again, it was another, I didn't understand. It wasn't, again, it use that word wise, it's not wise, it's just science. To me, it's science. A person who's going to come up with a sales and marketing strategy for your organization certainly has to think beyond a week, certainly beyond a year. There's someone who has to look out into the marketplace, look at your clients, look at your products and all that stuff and say, wow, for the next 3 to 5 years, I think we should be developing this, and this. I didn't get that, and I often hired people who had a shorter ability. They couldn't think, and it's not something you can teach. People either can think into the future or they can't think into the future, and that's where they level up in the organization. And have you heard of the Peter principle, rising to your level of incompetence? In startups, you have all these people, and they're all perfect for the startup. And as the organization gets larger and larger, they get promoted higher and higher. And they're perfect here, and they have the same values, and they might be same passionate, but all of a sudden they get put into a job where they can't possibly succeed because they don't know how to look into the future. And unfortunately, I didn't know some of these things when I was hiring some senior managers. They did good for a while, and everybody added value, but some of them, it was broke. It was broke.
And how can you tell in an interview or something? You spoke a little bit about how you can see motivation in somebody when you're interviewing. How do you see somebody's ability to think long range like that?
If you listen carefully, if you ask appropriate questions, open-ended questions, and you listen carefully enough, and you don't let go of your task, how far can this person think into the future? You hear it. You absolutely hear it. And you have to ask questions that, tell me about the last project that you worked on. And if they start saying, well, I was working in a real estate company, and my job was to figure out what property we needed to buy, and I always had to buy about 6 years in advance. Or the lead time in ordering this part was 9 months. And so when we were in product development, we had to hire a purchasing person who would start scouting for long lead time. Well, now you've got some,
Interesting.
and so you have to hear the words. Concrete examples of these people thinking long term. Otherwise, they are absolutely positively going to fail. Because if you look at a job description, as it gets higher and higher, the job description says it. Create a budget. Well, is that a year-long budget? I don't know how in the world would I do. And some people can't do a year budget. They don't even know how much money I have in their back pocket. So.
I have the same feeling because previously I'm an engineer, so I just work on a specific project. I have a deadline to deliver at a time. I don't need to think much forward. But now I'm actually acting as technical marketing. So now the engineering lead, they're asking me, hey, what's your view of this market 3 or 5 years down the road?
Right.
So it's planning forward that requires you to do more thinking.
Right. And the problem is that engineer who is absolutely great at developing this chip or this piece of code gets pushed up into a project management role when all of a sudden, if you look at the job description, it says work with marketing team or develop a quality assurance plan. Well, you know, you can't develop the quality assurance plan after the product is done. Right? And I have absolutely seen that happen. So it's there, and I wasn't smart enough to listen to that all of the time.
Then moving on to decision making and decision making with teams.
Mm-hmm.
So when making your important decisions, where do you draw a line that this decision I need to make it myself? For this decision, I need to consult the team or the group. How did you?
I look at it a little differently. When you're how about this? And Vince Lombardi was very good. Do you know who Vince Lombardi is? Oh, see, this is interesting. Vince Lombardi was a very famous football coach back in the 1960s, and he was the best, and his teams always won. And in football, you play every Sunday. So, and you know who you're going to play. On Monday, Vince Lombardi would sit with his team, and he would say, well, what plays should we do? And they'd have an open discussion. And it would be completely participatory. And then they'd say, well, maybe we should do this play. We should run the running back through over here on the right side. And he would go to the least intelligent person on the team and say, do you get that? And if he said no, he would say, this isn't good enough. And he would go back and he would have a very open discussion with the organization. And then on Sunday, when they were playing the game, if he said, you go right, no one would ever disagree with what he said. No one would ever question it. So if you take that into business, when you're formulating the goals for the organization or the goals for your department, that to me is a time when it's very, very participatory. You generally have direction from someone higher up, so there's some parameters there. But your job is to get buy-in on the plan and then to get perfect execution. I don't think we should do this today. No, we will continue to do this today. We'll review it maybe in 2 weeks or a month or 6 months if you don't like the plan. But for now, we decided, and you will do it my way. Or more appropriately, you will do it our way, the way we chose.
Interesting. So
does that answer your question? I mean, it's sort of...
Yeah, it does sort of, yeah. So another question as an extension of this is, say you are pressed for a decision and you are doing it in a group and the group couldn't reach a consensus or consensus decision in the prescribed amount of time, reasonable
Sure.
time. So how did you manage that situation? And
you just make a decision.
You just make some decision.
You just make a decision. You know what's really interesting
So
is...
should you avoid doing this, or is that just natural to happen, these kind of things?
You have to. An ineffective leader is a leader who is incapable of making a decision without all of the information. That's a completely ineffective leader. And so what you've described is a group of people, and groups always have a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
A group of people, they're working, they're trying to gather all that, they cannot come to consensus. They have different points of view, and more data gathering isn't going to help it. There isn't time, so the leader of the group just makes a decision. And if you're not capable of doing that, you shouldn't be a leader. You should not be a leader of the group. Or if you are, you can count on your ability to achieve the mission is compromised because you're wasting time. And the other thing that I've found is you can make a whole bunch of wrong decisions. And unfortunately, you never know which one is going to be terminal for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, we blow decisions all the time. And for some reason, for me, as I was running mine, I never made I never made the decision that destroyed the organization. But I made a bunch of wrong decisions, but because you've got a team and you're all moving in the right direction, you cover it up. Not cover it up, it's not terminal to the organization.
So essentially you recover, you're able to recover from that.
Right, yeah, I mean, you might not even know you made the mistake, but, or you do an analysis and you do it differently, but sometimes in groups, if the leader isn't capable of making a decision with 60 or 80% of the information, and you don't have people so passionate to the goal that they're not willing to do it someone else's way, then they don't belong on your team. Then you have a bad hire. Or more likely, you haven't done a good enough job creating excitement about the ultimate goal, and that you guys are arguing about these little decisions down here, when the person who lost the argument, let's go do it your way, and I'm going to work 110% to get there.
Sure. And on the opposite side of it, how do I avoid groupthink? So how do you avoid people just aligning themselves without doing any constructive discussions, constructive conflicts? How do you avoid this scenario on the other side?
You teach them over and over and over and over again, and you create a culture where that is not allowable. When people splinter off and create subversive subgroups, or they're having a conversation that needs to be had in the group. For me, the way I dealt with it, I considered that dishonest. You're saying stuff that needs to be heard, you're afraid to do that. It's okay to be afraid every once in a while. And when you find out about it, we all lie, we all make mistakes, we all can't adhere to the values. You need to relentlessly stop it. And that's where again, if you've got original buy-in from whether it's integrity or respect or honesty, whatever word you use that makes it wrong to have subversive conversations or hidden conversations or bathroom conversations, whatever you want to say, if you've got a system in place and you've practiced this over and over again, you can survive with what naturally happens in the organization, politics. It scared me when Dilbert cartoons were going up on the cubicles in my company because, I had politics. But we talked about it, and we tried to bring people back all the time, and we admitted errors. And so.
Yeah, I think I'm out of my time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it was a good question, and allow us to segue into the next and final topic here, which is managing change and conflict.
Right.
So I think a question that we're all pretty interested in hearing is, or asking and hearing a response to is, how did your company handle the change when you stepped down as the CEO? And to what extent did you stay involved in leading that change?
When I stepped down, we had an entirely new management team with a new set of values. And the organization struggled. Which is absolutely predictable. I could have found, or we could have found, a CEO and a new board and the investors and all of that who were completely aligned with my values and beliefs and all of that. I chose, or I made a mistake, or however you want to look at it, to get a team who had came from a different point of view. The organization struggled tremendously from that. Predictable and appropriate or a natural human outcome. It, right. So it was incredibly difficult. All new leaders in an organization, it is their responsibility at that point, especially of a larger organization, to, in my opinion, work with the management team, work with the employees to come up with a new set of values. There might be some overlap, there might not be. To lay it out and then to go out to the company and say, this is who we are. I need your buy-in. Some employees will stay, some employees won't. The important thing, though, is that the organization is clear about it at that time of change, and hires exactly the right people to come in to realign with the new set of values. 85% of acquisitions fail because there's a cultural yeah. 85, if you ask the owners of the two companies, 85% of them say it did not meet their expectations. And all the studies show that it's because of values conflict. So for me, the new management had a different set of values, and the organization, it was pained for quite a while.
So what did you do to prepare for that change? I guess personally, as well as within the organization as the outgoing management team. And as far as communicating the change to your workforce, I mean, how deliberate were you in preparing for that change? I assume fairly deliberate.
No, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? The culture change caught me off guard. The incredible impact of it caught me off guard. In hindsight, totally obvious. In the moment, not so obvious. Yeah. So it was a failure on my part. Yeah.
And did you lose people? Did you lose employees because of the change, or?
By the droves.
Yeah.
By the droves.
So what would you do differently if you were going to go through a similar situation? Or what advice could you give to us that you think might be valuable in assessing change?
It all depends what your intention. It all depends what your intention is. If your intention is perpetuity for the organization, then when you're hiring new management, make sure that their values are closely aligned with your values. If that's not, so you have to know what your goal is for the change. My goal in the change was to experiment at, not carelessly or recklessly, experiment at taking a company public. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what we can do. So I hired a whole bunch of sophisticated managers, brought in some very sophisticated investors, and the goal was to take the company public. That was the primary goal. Because of, now, and they might have been able to execute on it, but they were, this was right around the time of the .com, and they had a strategy that counted on that bubble staying for a little bit longer, so their strategy was wrong. And in addition, their values didn't align with mine, and there's not a right set of values or a wrong set of values. They didn't have, they just didn't align, so they had two devastating blows. They had two devastating blows, and sometimes organizations can't survive two devastating blows. And they figured out how to merge the company, and then they sold it into a public company, and but there were the blood on it was awful. Because in my opinion, and the biggest mistake I made long term in that organization, I wouldn't redo it for anything, was I didn't have perpetuity as a goal for the organization. I had premier provider of engineering services, I had shareholder value, I had great customer satisfaction, great employee satisfaction. I didn't have perpetuity, and if I'd had that, as I was filtering these investors and looking at the deal and how it was being structured and looking at the new management team, I would have made different decisions. Again, not right or wrong, just a couple of deadly blows, and the organization suffered tremendously.
Interesting.
Yeah. Painful.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Fascinating though.
Well, I think that takes us through the topics. Again, we thank you for your time.
My
We
pleasure.
really appreciate it. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Were you going to share the performance diagram?
Yeah, we can.
We could.
Uh-oh.
This is sort of.
Is it a test?
No.
Just,
This was an assignment we had
You can.
in leadership class was to.
So we were tasked to identify the characteristics of an effective team, and we came up with this particular model. What characteristics define an effective team, essentially? And these things have worked for our study group very well so far. So we just wanted to get some more advice.
It looks great.
Anything missing?
Well, see, it's interesting. I'm looking for where have you got the values?
That's just
in
what I
here.
was
Right.
thinking. Is it on here?
Well, you do. You have trust, mutual respect. See, and you also have this, authority to act and decide, and I think that's important. Empowerment, right? And you talked about when does someone have the right to make a decision, and when do you, as a leader, make a decision? Well, you have to figure that out. Adequate resources. Good luck. Yeah. In a sense, that's what makes management difficult.
Yeah.
Trying to get that.
resources always.
Right, because you always are. You're always shy
Exactly.
on resources.
Yes.
And if you're not, there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, there's
This is great.
Shared
Shared vision.
vision, which is
Right.
about resonance, I guess.
This was actually, it was voted.
Look at that recognition for results.
Yeah. So our classmates voted this as the #1 model
Good for you.
in the leadership class.
It looks great. You could write a book on it. See, the interesting thing about, you talk about the wisdom, there's only, there's only 20 things you need to know to be an effective leader. And there's thousands of books that write the same thing over and over and over again. And this is truly original. And you could write a book and create seminars, and you could make $1 million if you could convince enough people to learn this model, because after you gave it a couple of times, you'd tweak it and improve it, and it would be it. It'd be leadership. It'd be effective team performance, and there you go. You've got your own company.
That was our lab to market project. Right
There you go. You want to sit on our board?
No, right now. Right now.
Well, terrific. Well, we appreciate it, and I guess this concludes things. If no one else has any
Actually, I have
parting
one-
words of
one
advice,
last question. Do you believe the great leadership can be learned, or it's something more natural, like a born to someone? Do you have any insights on that?
I believe there is something inherent in an individual that allows them to be a leader or not a leader. And then education and experience nurtures that ability. It gets back to what I said. Some people's brains are wired that only allow them, by the time they get to be 20 or so, and this is the study, it was a massive study that they've done. By the time they get to be 20 or so, they're the 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 9 months, and to be a leader, depending on the size of the team, you're going to be topped out. So that to me is, and I don't know if it's, when you're 20, it's tough luck, you're at some certain level. And as you grow and mature and learn, you can take that 1 week and push it up to 3 months or push it up to a year, but you're not going to get to 20 years. And certainly CEOs of large multinational organizations who are running it successfully had better be able to think 20 years into the future, right?
Yeah.
A car manufacturer, an oil producer, you would hope. Home developers in California, if you can't think 10 years in the future. And so there is something innate. And I don't know if it's at birth or if it's how you're raised for your first 3 to 5 years, but something is set in concrete, soft concrete, by the time you're 20-ish years old, and you're only going to move that up a little bit no matter how hard you work. Which means God, this is such a terrible thing to say, it limits the size of the team and the type of team that you'll be able to lead, right?
Yeah, it's both the natural nature and also the learning training.
Yeah,
Okay.
nature and nurture, is that, right, there's a combination there.
Right.
And when I meet young 20-ish year old people, the difference between the person who's going to become the CEO of an organization and the person who's going to be a great engineer or scientist or admin assistant or floor sweeper is very apparent. Not good or bad or anything like that, because if they're happy and they're doing their job great and they've got a fulfilling life, great.